Hello, welcome back to another Q&A from NIC, EIC and Alexa. Welcome to everybody that's joined. Hello to Mr. Staniforth, who's watching on every single platform going. He seems to think it's funny to type in on YouTube, Facebook and on Twitter. This evening it's going to be myself and Sam. Despite what you may have seen on some of the social media platforms where it said just me, it's not. Unfortunately, we have Sam with us. No, sorry, fortunately, we have Sam with us. That's what I meant to say.
That's all right. I know my place.
Are you well? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm good. And you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. So, we'll probably wait for a few questions to come in, and then we'll take over from the stream. We always like to have some prepared just to start us off and get people's thinking minds going, just because sometimes it's a little bit daunting coming on here and asking questions. But please do, if you do have a question, please do put it into the comments. Steve on YouTube has already popped us one in, so we'll have a look at that in a second. We'll take one from the prepped questions that we have off the back of the Q&A from the webinar last Wednesday. Was that with you, Sam? Yeah. I've lost track now. I'm doing so many of these webinars on all different platforms. I'm getting confused as to where we are. So we've got some questions off the back of that Q&A. If you haven't seen that already, you can gain access to that via the portal. That's the secure parts of the website, niceic.com and alexa.co.uk. You can go in there, sign in and watch them again. I believe it's a link back to the webinars, and that goes for every single webinar that we've done up to date, so you can go view them back if you wish to do so. So the first question is, what classification code would you give to a socket outlet on a landing which is less than 3 meters horizontally from the edge of the bath? I'll put my teeth back in a second.
Okay. So there is the so-called 3 meter rule, but that applies to sockets within the location containing a bath or a shower. So if we're actually outside of that location because we're on the landing and there's a bathroom door, then we don't need to comply with that because the socket's actually considered in a different location, because the location will be the perimeter of it will be the wall and the door of the bathroom. So you wouldn't need to comply if it's outside the location. You'd need to comply with general regs, so parts 1 to 6 still apply, and so if we're talking about domestic, we'd be looking at the possibility of additional protection by an RCD, etc. But it wouldn't, strictly speaking, need to comply with that 3 meter rule, because that's limited to purely a socket within the location of the bathroom.
So what about if it didn't have a door on that location? Say it was like almost an open, like ensuite, for example. Would that still comply, or does it have to be with a door on it to separate the two?
Yeah, it has to be something that physically separates. So if you go right to the front of the special location section 701, it tells you effectively what limits that locations, and it's walls, doors, fixed partitions from floor to ceiling, etc. So yeah, you would need to be outside in the next room, as we think of it in most terms. If you've got an open ensuite into the bath, into the bedroom, then that would comply as one location. Mm-hmm. So that's where you can sometimes have to consider the 3 meter rule, or of course if you're in a very big bathroom where you have actually got 3 meters from the edge of the bath. But yeah, it's walls and doors that comply. Sorry, I've got to tell you, but my mistake. Forgot to tell me.
It's like the message in the cinema. Please make sure you turn your phones off. We obviously didn't get that memo this evening. Okay, we'll answer some of the questions that are coming in then. Steve from YouTube already said that he posted a question. His question is, if an electrical contractor has ceased trading and I am employed for finishing the project, how do I certify the works? issue an electrical condition report for his installation and a certificate for mine?
In general, that's it. We under our schemes, we don't permit third-party certification. So the most you could do would be do a condition report for what's there already, and then be very detailed on your installation certificate as to the extent of work that you're taking responsibility for. It's also worth pointing out, if this is domestic work, then liaise with the local authority's building control group, because when it comes to notification, you may have to go through a process which is called regularisation. So that's a situation whereby, again, you'd have to do a condition report for what was there already, but you won't be able to, for example, confirm that cables are buried in the wall at the right depth, because you're not going to be destructive. Mm-hmm. So there's normally an additional insurance associated with the regularisation process. But we always recommend, if it's for domestic work and you ultimately need to achieve that building compliance certificate, before you do anything, talk to the local authority, explain what the situation is, and they'll tell you the best way to proceed.
Okay, well, in relation to that question then, Sam, how far into the build would that then apply to? So if you could see all of the cables, all of the runs, you've tested the cables, you've seen that there's no damage to them physically, or when does that start to apply?
Well, that's it in a nutshell, which is why quite often the local authority will either themselves or through one of their authorised inspectors come around and see what the current condition is. And if it is still at first fix phase and it hasn't been boarded, so you can do a condition report for everything, then it's less onerous in terms of the unknowns, and therefore you might not have to provide additional insurance. But if, for example, it's been first fixed, it's been boarded, so now all you've got to do is second fix, then they may ask for some insurance to cover those unknowns. So that's why it's very good, always let them know what the current situation is and liaise with them. Because if there's virtually been nothing done, then in some instances they may actually advise you to rip it out and start again. Because if that's the cleanest way, and that's possible because there has been very limited work and you're not going to be destructive to any parts of the building, then that may be another approach. But yeah, liaise with the local authority.
Okay, keep the questions coming, guys. There's plenty of you in here, so I'm sure you've got plenty of questions. Ben said, would a TT earthing system with no Type 1 SPD warrant a C3? It's no code for in the Electrical Safety First Best Practice Guide number 4, but would you agree this is a greater risk?
With it being TT, it then depends, is it TT because it's rural and it's got overhead lines and it's in a high risk part of the country, then those are the things that really drive it down the route of fitting SPDs. It's not necessarily a requirement just because it's a TT system, but yeah, quite often, in most instances we'd associate overhead lines with TT, and then that would be a consideration then for SPDs because of the higher risk associated with those overhead lines.
Would it be a Type 1 though, Sam, or would it need to be a Type 2 if it's fitting that?
No, Type 1 SPD would only be really where you've got a lightning protection system. So, it depends what type of building, where its location is, and how it compares with the others in the vicinity. But we would normally only associate Type 1 SPD with a building which has got lightning protection.
Okay. Alex has asked the question, how do I have done I have recently done an EICR. The customer moved the cooker and it's partly under the top unit. No gap, 750mm above the cooker. The current gap is around 400mm. Obviously the cooker switch is behind the cooker. What code would you recommend? So I think he's trying to allude to there, Sam, is that the cooker switch is actually behind the cooker.
Okay. So there's a requirement in the regs for every installation, every circuit, every appliance to have a means of isolation. But then the location of that means of isolation is based on the hazards. Now, the recommendation with hobs and cooking appliances, because of the hazard associated with heat, is that isolation switch be within 2 meters of the appliance. So if we're looking at it from the point of view of, okay, so there is a means of isolation, but it's not easily accessible in the event of emergency, then I think we'd certainly be looking at that it could be improved. So that's where you'd be looking perhaps down the C3 route. You have got a means of isolation, even if you do have to go back to the breaker in the board, but obviously that may not be conveniently placed to prevent danger in the event of a hazard appearing. So you've got to consider, yes, I've got a means of isolation, but is it adequately placed? If it's not adequately placed, then could I get it into a better place, in which case you'd be looking at a C3.
If there's signs of thermal damage from the hob though itself, then obviously we would recommend that you would code that completely different, because it's not to do with what you've just been speaking about there, Sam. It's more to do with the thermal effects that are happening from the cooker itself.
The guidance is to not put anything directly above the hob. So if it's because they've moved the cooker, now the cooker switch is directly above the hob, then yeah, it perhaps needs some inspection to see if there is any signs of thermal damage, and perhaps you've got to consider how long has it been there for. So if they've only just recently moved the cooker, you'd have to think about, okay, well, there's no signs now, but maybe I need to consider coming back after it's been used for a while to see if there is. Quite often as well, talk to the manufacturer of the cooker, because quite often the rings, the heating elements, don't go all the way back to the very final part. So actually there is a sort of a corridor, a spare space at the back, which doesn't suffer too badly from the thermal effect of the hob itself.
Okay, hopefully that's answered that for you, Alec. Steve's asked from YouTube, he said, I've got a board change to do and the tails need to be changed. Old tails run up the cavity wall. Can I put new cables up the cavity wall?
Yeah, no, we don't ever recommend installing cables in cavity walls because of the potential. Well, we can't support them, so that they might be under stress, or the connections may then become under stress. We can't guarantee that they're not going to be damaged during installation while they're pulled through that. You can often compromise the whole purpose of the cavity by now you're creating something that's going in one side and out, so you can bridge that damping effect. So yeah, we don't advise running cables in the cavity wall. And of course you've also got the possibility that at some stage people may fill that with thermal insulation, and then you've very detrimentally affected the current carrying capacity of your cable. So yeah, we don't recommend running cables within the cavity.
Brilliant stuff. Hopefully that's answered that for you, Stephen. You've got a clear idea of how you're going to run them cables instead of running them at the cavity. Bonding and bathrooms. Do circuits still require... Let me get this right. The circuits still require RCD if the fitting is class 2. Same if supplementary required if no RCD. Not too sure of the wording of that, but...
Yeah, current regulations will tell us that all circuits serving the bathroom have to be RCD protected. So regardless of the class of the item of equipment, and that's really just due to the fact of the greater perceived risk. So because now you're going to be potentially unclothed, body wet, so resistance low, so you're more susceptible to electric shock, which is why the requirement for RCD protection is there. So that's there irrespective of the class of equipment that you're protecting, or your other measure if you are trying to use class 2 as your protection against electric shock. It's still a requirement for the circuit to be protected by an RCD.
And then he's gone on to say, is supplementary bonding required if no RCD is present?
Okay, so if we look at an older installation, so an older installation where there is adequate supplementary bonding, then if we come to do a condition report, we'd say lack of RCD protection where there is adequate supplementary bonding would be a C3. Okay. If it's a case of now we're doing something new, then if we've got main equipotential bonding in the installation and we provide the circuits with RCD protection, then there's no need to supplementary bond within the bathroom. So it's not something we can add now and be compliant with current regs, but it's one of those ones that it was a requirement before RCDs were required. So because we tend to not make our new regulations retrospective, if the bathroom's there and it's got adequate supplementary bonding, then we recommend that lack of RCD protection is only a C3. It's only a recommended improvement to bring it up to current standards.
Okay. A few people tagging a few friends. Thank you for that, Dean. The more the merrier. We'd like to see more and more people in here. Please remember that if you are watching, then make sure you turn on the live notifications, like the page, etc. Just so that it helps our stream broaden out and more people will view it. Who knows, maybe one day we'll have consumers in here and not just electricians. Supply cable and cable head low level on the side of door, split concentric from cable head buried in a wall to high level meter on the other side of door on same face of wall, approximately 4 meters away. What would this be coded as its D&O equipment? Supply cable and cable head low level. I'm not too sure there would be a code with there, Sam, in regards to that.
Well, one thing that I picked out about the installation, if that's 4 meters away from the consumer unit, then we've got to think about the tails being provided with overload protection. So normally our regs BS7671 allow us to admit overload protection if the DNO provide a means of overload and agree to us using it. Now, they always provide a means of overload through the cutout fuse, but it's the agreement bit. They will normally only allow us to use that for overload protection if we stay within 2 or 3 meters. So once we go beyond that, we're then sort of saying, okay, unless there's some documentation to say that they've agreed, we're not complying with the regs. So now we've got to look at, is it unsafe? So if we can still meet the ZS of the cutout fuse, so we haven't gone so far that we're above the ZS. If we can still meet the ZS, then it would just be a C3, and it's non-compliant because we haven't got the DNO's agreement, but it's not unsafe. And then, of course, if we go so far, although I don't believe 4 meters would be in that ballpark, but if we do go very far and we can't achieve the ZS of the cutout fuse, then we're looking at a C2. I was a bit confused with I think it's one of those ones that we might have to have a look at, because I got the impression that it was fixed to a door, which would be a moving part of the...
That's probably why they've got the 4 meters worth of cable to give them that expansion when they shut and open the door.
Well, I don't think the DNO would be too happy about
No, definitely not.
their equipment being moved every time someone opened or closed a door. But maybe that's one. Maybe that's one for a picture for
the coding clinic. Yeah. Dean Kinsella has asked, are there any situations where a 13 amp socket outlet is permitted and locates less than 3 meters from zone 1?
Not if it's inside the same location. We get a lot of questions which talk about, okay, what about if I put it in a cupboard? Yeah, but perhaps because they've got an appliance, a washing machine in the bathroom. And if it's in the same location, then no, the 3 meter rule applies. Quite often with a cupboard or with a fixed partition, we can create an area which is outside of the zones, but the 3 meter rule still applies. Yeah? So even if we can create an enclosure, a small cupboard that will take the inside of that cupboard outside of the zones, we still have to comply with the 3 meter rule, because that cupboard wouldn't be considered a limitation of the location. The cupboard would still be considered in the location, and hence we have to still comply with the 3 meter rule.
Question around bonding then, Sam. Coding for undersized bonding on an older installation. It's not giving us a clue as to what the type of system is, but he's just asked undersized bonding on an older installation.
Okay, so if providing we've got 6 mil bonding conductors and they're not showing any signs of thermal damage, then there's no requirement, unless we can either see signs of thermal damage or we can perhaps measure that there are circulating currents in the bonding conductors which could lead to thermal damage. So long as they're a minimum of 6 mil, then it's recommended that there's no requirement to change them or upgrade them to current. So that's the situation on an older installation. Anything below 6 mil though would then be wouldn't have been compliant at the time. So then that would be something that would need to be upgraded. And if it were the case that it was a TNCS installation, would need to be upgraded to a minimum of 10 mil. But if it's an older installation currently with 6 mil, and providing there's no signs of thermal damage or there's no measured circulating currents in the bonding conductors, then it's not a requirement to upgrade them.
Okay, hopefully that's answered that one for you, Matthew. Do you always need to use an earth rod when installing a hot tub? Before you start, I will plug the technical article. There is a technical article on the portal, which I've already mentioned. You can gain access to that via your secure parts of niceic.com and alexa.co.uk. I'll get there. So you can gain access to that via the portal. Have a little read through that, but I'm sure you'll like to have your input on this as well, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, it was perhaps the top question we were getting back in those heady summer days of May and June, which feel like a long time ago now. In general, no. I mean, you do have to consider manufacturer's instructions, but the majority, well, certainly all reputable hot tubs will be built to an equipment standard, and most of them will be class 2 or even some are class 3. So no, you don't have to install an earth rod for every hot tub installation. There may be some instances where you consider it because you can't prevent simultaneous access and you can't get confirmation that it's class 2. But in the majority, no, you don't have to install an earth rod for an outdoor hot tub. But yeah, definitely strongly recommend getting hold of that free article. It was published as a standalone article, and I think will very soon be in a Connections magazine as well.
Yeah, it's going to be
very well worth a read.
It's going to be in the latest edition, I believe, for the Connections magazines, which should be landing maybe next month, is it? Off the top
Yeah,
of my
they
head,
normally
November.
do winter, don't they?
Yeah, so it'll be a winter month Connections magazine, which will be landing with you very shortly. Any more questions that you think that you might want to ask away. We've got roughly about 5 or so minutes left with you. Be taking you through till 8:30. I've got a question, Sam, that we've actually prepared, which is probably quite a poignant one to talk about. In line with the government guidelines, we had an electrician visit our rented property. He verbally advised what work needed to be done within the property and then completed it and issued an EIC. The estate agents are saying that there is no... Sorry, I'll start again. The estate agents are saying that there has to be an EICR as well to be in line with the government guidelines. Do you know if this is correct, please? They even use their manners.
Yeah, no, it's a common question theme that we're getting a lot, and people are getting a little bit frustrated as to why an EIC isn't accepted. It is part of the new legislation, so the new PRS electrical safety legislation which came in and is controlled by MHCLG, that's the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, specifically says that you've either got to have an EICR that's current and and has confirmation that the installation had a satisfactory condition and is less than 5 years old, or if it's a brand new property, so you've got a brand new installation, they will accept an electrical installation certificate, or if you've done a complete rewire of the property, they'll accept an electrical installation certificate. So basically, if it's not brand new or you've not done a complete rewire, you might find, for example, if you do a board change, that you have to do an installation certificate and a Part P notification for the board change, but you also have to do a condition report to meet the PRS legislation, because the landlord effectively wants to have that condition report to register the property as satisfactory with his local authority. So it is that situation whereby an installation certificate for a board change where you haven't rewired is not acceptable under the PRS scheme. You have to do that EICR as well.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is going to be a pain for some people. But if they're doing consumer unit changes, Sam, pretty much before the change, there should be some sort of testing being carried out before they do the changes, or not?
Yeah, absolutely. We recommend that, because the danger being that you inherit a fault. I mean, the classic example is you go from a non-RCD board to an RCD board. Now all of a sudden you've got a much more sensitive protective device which starts tripping because there was already an earth fault there. So it wasn't a dead short to earth, it was a high resistance to earth, let's say a couple of thousand ohms, but it's low enough to operate the RCD. Now you're then stuck in that situation of, okay, I can't energise that circuit because there's a fault on it, and I can't leave it without RCD protection because I've changed the board. So yeah, we always recommend doing some testing on the existing installation before you change the board, just so that you don't inherit some problems which you're then going to have to rectify. Well, you don't have to rectify them, but it's going to be very difficult to walk away with everything working without having rectified it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it is one of those. We always recommend it, unless it's a distress change. So let's say you've had a flood or whatever, so you're changing the board anyway, then yes, that's something. But if it's a non-distress change, we always recommend doing those preliminary tests to make sure that the installation is safe to re-energise with the new board.
Mm-hmm. Now, that information from MHCLG, Sam, can anybody gain access to that? Is that a document that anyone can gain access to? Just because there's just come a question in now that says people are asking for condition report after I've issued an electrical installation. certificate, do I need to issue an EICR as well? We've literally just spoke about that. So you can either watch this back and gain the information there, or you can go to the government website and grab the document. What's the document name off the top of your head?
I know if you put in your search bar, put in electrical safety checks in the private rented sector,
yeah,
and it will come up. So you'll get the draft legislation, which is free to download, and then you'll get a couple of documents, a landlord's guide, which is very good, and you can sort of hand over to the landlords if that's who your customers are, because it clearly states what's needed.
Mm-hmm. So, Ricardo, if you want to grab yourself go over to that website or watch this back, then that'll explain that for you. Good evening, Jake. Is this all the coding sessions you have? Is there a place to go and watch them all, as I keep missing them due to being on father duties? You can go and watch them. If you've signed up to the webinars, I actually found this out the other day as well, because I was trying to talk a contractor through on how to gain access to them. If you download the software onto your smartphone or onto a laptop or anything like that, you can, if you've already signed up and you've got the email, use the 6-digit code that comes with the email, and that will actually link you back to the old webinars, and it will ask you if you want to watch them again. So you can do it that way, or you can go into your secure part of the portal, which we've already mentioned, or you can go back onto any social media platform that we have and start to watch some of these Q&As back as well. Last question. Oh, sorry, just before I do the last question, Sam, somebody said that we talked about the undersized earth bonding, but we never actually answered what code it was.
Okay, so if it's 6 mil, then there's no code at all, providing it's not showing any signs of thermal damage, and it's not showing any circulating neutral currents which could lead to thermal damage. So 6 mil, no code at all. If it's below 6 mil, then it would be considered, let me think, is it C3, recommended improvement, or C2? It would be C2 because of the potential inadequacy of the bonding. So you're not perhaps going to be able to create your equipotential zone under fault conditions.
Okay. Done.
Yeah, I have to admit there's a thought in my mind, so I'm going to check myself.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'll finish off one of the last questions. With COVID restrictions, what do we do if an EICR is limited with testing, as in tenants do not want you there or tenants don't want you in the property at all? Could the government extend the 1st of April deadline? We've not seen anything, or we've not heard anything as of yet about them extending that 1st of April deadline. That seems to be set in stone at the moment. In terms of consequences of what's going to happen for the people that haven't had their properties tested, we're unsure as well. We cannot give you a straight answer, unfortunately, Matt, as to what will be going on with the COVID and the legislation side of things. When we do, though, we will try and bring you some information and make sure it's clear that you understand what's going on, and we'll let you know if that deadline has been extended. But at the moment, we just can't say, and we don't think that deadline is going to be extended from the 1st of April. Are you come to a conclusion?
Yeah, no, that's right. Yep. What we said. Thankfully, sweat off. So yeah, if it's under 6 mil or showing signs of thermal damage, then we recommend a C2.
You're only human, Sam, so you make mistakes sometimes. It does happen.
Well, everybody. I always remember I was told the person who doesn't make mistakes is the person who does nothing. So yeah, don't be afraid of making a mistake. Just don't make it the same one twice. And yeah, you're absolutely right what you were saying about the April 1st, which is obviously for all of those existing tenants. Mm-hmm. We're not being told of any changes, but perhaps we're still at some ways off that. Maybe there'll be an announcement or a change in January or so. But right now, everybody should be gearing up for April the 1st.
And if it doesn't get extended, it's going to be a busy few months for everybody.
Well, I mean, we've seen a huge rise in condition reportings, and that can only obviously be for new tenants, because they're the only ones affected at the moment. and I'd imagine there's got to be multiple times more existing tenants than there are new. So yeah, it could be a lot of work out there.
With the in regards to the COVID, I know there's been some recent changes that have come out this evening. I was watching it just before we came on here. Please remember to stay safe and keep all your families safe as well. We look forward to seeing you soon. For now, though, take care and stay safe. Goodbye.
Good night, gents.